All right, welcome everybody. This is the latest installment of our series of webinars about Launch School and what we're doing here. And this one in particular is going to focus more on a topic rather than the program. So today we're going to talk about mastery-based learning and what that means. And just like in previous webinars, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it. I might not answer every single question. If I don't get to yours, go ahead and send me an email afterwards. If you've never heard of mastery-based learning before, hopefully this will give you some insight into what learning to mastery means and what it entails. And also we'll talk about what it looks like here at Launch School. If you have heard of mastery-based learning, hopefully this will reaffirm some of the concepts that you already know. But we'll specifically talk about the structure at Launch School, the curriculum, and even talk about the pricing and why we chose the pricing and our support structure the way we did. And we'll have some room at the end for Q&A. Okay, first of all, just a quick agenda. We'll talk about a little bit of background about some of the questions we see students ask us, and then we'll get into the current education models. So how our current education models fulfilling the student questions, and then finally we'll talk about a mastery-based learning approach, which is what we espouse here at Launch School. It's not a panacea of education, so there are definitely some trade-offs, and we'll talk about some of those towards the end, and we'll close it out with a Q&A if there's any questions at the end. Feel free to ask questions throughout as well. So first of all, before we even talk about the various education models, let's talk about what students want. So here at Launch School, as you can imagine, we see a lot of questions. We see a lot of people asking about, how do I get a job? How do I build an app? Those are the two main questions. Primarily the first one, how do I get a job? Some people will ask how to build an app. Very, very few people ask us the latter two bullets, right? So vast majority focus on the first bullet. And if you look at the wording of these two or these four bullets, the bottom two are mastery goals. The top two are what's called performance goals. This is part of what psychologists call goal orientation theory. I don't necessarily want to get into the details of that, but this is how we're going to think about some of the topics we're going to cover today. So through the lens of mastery goals versus the lens of performance goals. If you just kind of look at the wording there, what are the difference between mastery goals and performance goals? In order to reach those goals listed, there are different learning options. I'm going to try to be quick on this slide. We can spend a lot of time here, but primarily Launch School is a one-to-many school, right? We have a little bit of one-on-one, we have a little bit of community, but for the most part, we're a one-to-many type of learning environment. Self-learning has its pros and cons. Very, very cheap, free, perhaps, but you lack the structure. One-on-one is the best, bar none, by far the most expensive. We have this one-to-many teaching model that is sort of the in-between. And the idea of a really good one-to-many teaching model is that it can get you to 80, 90% of a one-on-one tutor at a fraction of the price. So students, when they go to a training program, they always ask these two questions, right? I need something that will ensure me a job at the end. And if you're more ambitious, you'll say, I need something that has employers tripping over themselves to hire its graduates. That's what I'm looking for. And again, I want to go back to the idea of these questions or these demands as being performance-oriented goals. So there's some sort of finality here in this wording, right? Ensure me a job at the end. Hiring graduates. So there's this notion of graduation, right? And these are definitely performance-oriented goals. Very natural questions, of course. And training companies respond to these performance goals that students say they want to achieve. So let's take a look at how the current education models of today tries to fulfill those performance goals. When the goal has a definite fixed end, then the training program has to have a fixed duration, right? It has a definite fixed performance goal. Then you have to have this factory model or time-based model. And that's what we see today. And it's actually pretty normal. It's not unique to this learn to program industry. This is how we all consume education, right? Middle school, high school, college. Students are sort of put on this conveyor belt as if at a factory, right? Moving forward at a set pace from one topic to the next, with complete disregard for the comprehension level each step of the way, right? I think we've all seen this. We've all felt this. High school or college is just, when you take a class, not everyone is going to be A+ student at the end, right? There's this notion of a bell curve. So an example would be like taking a class on learning to drive. For example, you take a class for 5 days, and day 1 could be, let's learn how to make right turns. Day 2 could be, let's learn how to make left turns. Day 3 could be, let's learn how to parallel park, etc., etc. And this is what we call syllabus-driven learning, right? Or the factory model. There's an agenda, there's a syllabus. You just move forward at a certain pace in that syllabus. When you do that, you can't guarantee, and suppose this is a driving class for 3 people. There's no guarantee that at the end of this 1 week, everyone's going to be really good drivers. In fact, quite likely the opposite. So how does that translate to what we see today in this learning to program industry? We see the factory model being replicated here, right? I took some screenshots. You can see 12 weeks, some are 6 months, 4 months. I think my favorite one is the 24 weeks of awesome. And then the bottom left there, you see 6 weeks, and they even list the hours, 1,000 hours, 1,000 plus hours. If you do the math there, that's over 60 hours a week. I'm not sure if that's awesome, but training programs have to do this because students have goals that are performance related, and therefore they have to execute or implement training programs that have a fixed duration. And whenever there's a fixed duration, comprehension is variable, right? Comprehension varies at the end. So this causes some skepticism and questioning from students, right? There's this innate skepticism related to education models because we draw upon our previous learning experiences through middle school, high school, college, etc., right? And we know that not everybody in the class gets an A+. We know that not everybody we went to college with got a great job. So we ask training programs these questions, right? What's your graduation rate? How many people get hired? How can you make any guarantees of anything? Right? Very natural. And then even more questions, right? You get into the nitty-gritty details, right? What if this scenario happens? How would you handle that? Right? And then people start talking about themselves, right? What if I'm too old, too young, too gendered? A lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty behind all these questions. The source of that anxiety and uncertainty comes from our past experience with the factory-based model of education, and then coming to this industry of learning to program and running into the same thing, right? Running into the same sort of time-based education model. And something clicks in your head saying, wait a second, right? Definitely not everybody can become an A+ student. Yet you're charging everybody the same. How does that work? This is how it works. So I want to present the 2 models that time-based or factory-based education is implemented in. The first model is variable input. The second model is high-quality input. These are the only 2 models that can work in a factory-based, traditional, time-based education model. So this is what variable input model looks like. there's a variation in input, and there's some sort of machinery that guides you through some duration of awesome. And at the end, there's some variable output, right? This is what we call the community college model: fixed duration, variable comprehension. Employers have to sift through the graduates and look for the stars. There's definitely stars in this model, definitely stars in community college, right? But employers have to kind of sift through. It's hard to ensure a job in this model. You can say the top 10% get jobs, top 25%. In a great market, you can say top 50%, top 60%, right? You can make those claims when the market is really good. But this is one way to implement this factory-based education model. All right, so if you're trying to pick a training program, you might say, well, I don't want to be variable, right? That's not reassuring. I want to be insured. I want to be insured. How do you get that insurance? So we go to the second way that factory-based education is implemented. It's through strict admissions. So there's this very strong filter that filters out everything except for the stars. And so we have this high quality input. We send it through the teaching machinery of X weeks of awesome, and then we get high quality output. Employers, of course, love this, right? We call this the Ivy League model, because you don't have to necessarily graduate, right? Getting in is impressive because that's the hard part. So if you got into Harvard, that in itself is impressive. So it's still fixed duration, right? You still have some X weeks of awesome there. And you still have variable comprehension at the end. However, the standard deviation is much smaller. So employers love working with training programs or schools that execute this model, right? So these are the two models. Let's summarize real quick. The two predominant education models of today: community college model, Ivy League model. Both are fixed time. Both work towards performance goals, and both vary at the end in terms of students' comprehension. Let's think about that a little bit. What if there is an education system that can take variable input and at the end turn all of that input into stars? So notice there's not filtering here, right? So it's not a filter out every single shape except for the stars, right? So everyone can become a star. How does that work? How does that work? And this is what mastery-based learning is all about. It's this machinery of converting all the input into stars, into high quality output. Okay, there's two main attributes to mastery-based education. First is you have to remove all time-based measurements. And this is really, really important. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. And the second is you move to a new topic only after mastery of the current topic. Sounds intuitive, but out of these two values or attributes falls out a lot of consequences and ramifications for how we learn, and for launch school, how we implement a teaching system. So we'll take a look at that next. So this is a typical knowledge skills acquisition tree. It is not unique to mastery-based learning. In factory-style learning, you also have a similar knowledge or skills acquisition tree. The difference is when you move down this tree, right? So here in this graph, the nodes are atomic concepts. A, B, C, D, and E. Individual nodes are atomic concepts. And then AB is a compound concept. And so you want to learn things in order. The difference between a mastery-based approach is that we move down the tree when we reach comprehension. In a factory-based model, you move down the tree after a certain duration. So let's take a look at this 3 nodes here. This is just the top left of that larger tree. So the idea is you master A, then you master B, and then you master AB. That, I think, is very intuitive. In mastery-based education, movement between nodes is dictated by a comprehension level. It's not time-based, right? It's not time-based progress. It's not, we're going to spend a week learning A, we're going to spend another week learning B, and then we'll spend 2 weeks learning AB. It's not like that. It's don't move down the node until you've mastered A. A phrase that we use sort of behind the scenes at launch school is ambiguity compounds exponentially if you don't deal with it one at a time, right? If you don't deal with it as it comes up, fuzziness, ambiguity, then it is not going to get easier. Suppose you're at 80% comprehension of node A, topic A. Very, very common in a time-based learning environment after a week to not be at 100%, right? Very common. I think we've all experienced this. You're at 80%. You move forward to topic AB. It's not that all of a sudden your knowledge of A is going to increase. It's that the ambiguity is starting to grow at an exponential rate, causing you to fall further and further behind. So it's extremely important to master A before moving to AB. In mastery-based education, I'm trying not to use the word move forward, right? I'm trying to say move down the tree. It's very difficult for me to do that all the time because I am also ingrained in this factory-based model of education, right? So in mastery-based education, we want to measure forward progress as an hour spent, not in new topics encountered, right? In a factory model, we might say, I'm moving forward to AB, even though my comprehension level of A is 50%. Feels like progress. It's not. You're actually compounding the ambiguity, right? So instead of learning A really well, then learning AB, you now, if you move forward without reaching a high level of mastery of A, you now are trying to learn both at the same time. You're trying to catch up. You just think about that, doing that week after week after week. Stand no chance. Here's some attributes of mastery-based learning. Because it is not time-based, so you don't have a cohort that you're moving forward, everyone's going forward or moving to a new topic at the same time, it's self-paced. Who's your peer group? Your peer group is the learners at each stage. It's not a particular class or cohort. Because it's mastery-centered and not time-centered, there's really an indefinite duration. This is why we said remove time from the equation. That's a prerequisite of mastery-based education. Have to remove time. And we don't know how long it's going to take. It's also assessment-driven. So we talked about learning to comprehension of node A before moving to AB. Well, how do you know? This is why you have assessments. And in launch school, we do the assessments. So what we found is that people, especially beginners, are really bad at assessing themselves. And a lot of times people give themselves a way out instead of saying, hey, you have to go and learn this really well. People will sort of just say, it's okay, right? So assessment has to be from a third party and an expert, right? Not another student. And then finally, in mastery-based learning, your progress is measured by hours and how deeply you know a thing, not how many new topics you encountered. So it's less exciting, right? So consequences of some of this is if it's self-paced and you don't have a cohort, it's a lonely experience. It can be a lonely experience. This one's tough. Indefinite duration. So this is in conflict with performance goals, right? Performance goals are like, I'm going to get a job in 6 months. I'm going to close $1 million in sales this quarter, right? These are performance goals. Indefinite duration is in direct conflict with performance goals. This indefinite duration is also the main source of anxiety because you don't know how long it's going to take, right? Every other email I get, it seems, from prospective students is about how long is it going to take. Because people need to set aside their life. But mastery-based learning is about an indefinite duration, however long it takes. Again, the assessment, in order for the assessments to be impactful, it has to be from an expert. This is where we spend our time with students. A lot of one-on-one time is spent here at the assessment level. Very annoying if you can't pass. Everyone nods their head in agreement when we say we have assessments. Oh, great, there's assessments. What if you can't pass? And finally, this value of learning something well instead of trying to encounter new topics as a measurement of progress doesn't feel like progress. And it's extremely boring. Back in high school, for example, if you took a math class and you didn't really understand a topic of the day, it almost feels like, oh good, we have a new topic tomorrow, right? I get to start over. That's not how math works, right? So there's some downside to a mastery-based sort of learning environment. And so this is the diagram that shows what a mastery-based learning process looks like for those 3 nodes that we were looking at earlier. You notice what's not in a diagram. Any mention of how long it'll take, right? So you just practice the topic in node A until you can pass the assessment. Same thing with B. And then what happens once you get to AB? More of the same. Not tremendously exciting. And also a little bit uncertain because we don't know how long it's going to take. So one phrase we always use is local mastery before integration. This is very simply the idea of reaching mastery each step of the way before you tackle compound topics, right? Before you start to integrate topics. Because as we know earlier, these compound topics is where the complexity increases at an exponential level. The hard part about learning all of this stuff is not any one of those things in isolation from an intellectual perspective. It's the complexity arises when we start integrating and combining. So each step of the way in a mastery-based learning environment, comprehension is mandatory. Time is variable, right? Comprehension is mandatory. It's the opposite, right, of the factory model. Factory model is where on this conveyor belt, comprehension is variable. Moving forward in a new topic is mandatory, right? Mastery-based is the opposite of that. Okay, this slide is kind of big, so I'll go through the points one by one. And in some ways, this is really the key, right, in terms of how to learn with mastery. I think when we talk about mastery, people nod their heads, but you have to understand the consequence. And you have to understand that it requires a change in behavior from how we normally consume education since we're trained in a factory model. Right? So first of all, you have to eliminate timelines in your programming journey. That is seemingly a crazy concept. Eliminate timelines. What we've seen is that it is the major source of anxiety, and it causes a change in behavior, and it deviates away from a comprehension-focused learning path. So an example I can give you is that nearly every single conversation I have with people is related to timelines. So we'll look at the calendar and somebody will say, okay, I got until December to do this, to get a job. And what will happen is they'll look at the entirety of the knowledge or skills acquisition tree and they'll work backwards in terms of how long they think each node will take. And they'll divide it up based upon how long they have. So let's say it's July now, you have 6 months until the end of December. So if you look at all those nodes, you divide it by 6 months, perhaps you get to 2 weeks per node, something like that. 2 weeks per node. Sounds like a reasonable thing to do. I think most people would agree that that is an okay way of making plans. What happens though when you're working on node A and you're on week 3 and you're barely halfway through it? What happens, right? all of a sudden your behavior may change because you have a growing sense of anxiety looking at the calendar, looking at your progress on no day, and going, I don't have time. I'm already 1 week behind, and I'm only halfway through this thing. Let's go, let's go, let's go. This is what I mean by deviation from a mastery or comprehension focused learning path. It's got to be around mastery and it's got to be around comprehension. It can't be about time. And if we ask the student, hey, why did you set this timeline of December, right? Usually they'll have a lot of anxiety. So I'll say, what's the source of the anxiety here? Well, I got to finish by December. So why do you have to finish by December? My contract is ending. It's like, what does your contract have to do with learning this to mastery? They're completely two unrelated concepts. So this timeline is a very artificial timeline. When I say artificial, I don't mean that it's unimportant. Definitely important. What I mean is it's unrelated to comprehension. How quickly you're learning. It's unrelated to that, these timelines that people inject into the schedule here. So got to eliminate timelines. I don't know any other way around it. And it's really hard. But it's the major source of anxiety. And whenever anxiety creeps in, behavior changes. Weird behavior is introduced. And you start to try to work your way around the comprehension. Second thing I want to talk about is staying focused on fundamentals. This is easy to read, very hard to do, especially for the curious-minded learner, which most people in our program are. That's a good attribute. But that attribute can have a negative side effect, which is this need to monitor everything new. It's this fear of missing out, reading blogs, reading the news. I don't want to miss out on the new big thing. And one thing I want to convey is that you have to keep in mind, these people who write the blogs, these people who write the articles are playing to our fears. And this is not unique to the software industry. You look at any advertisement on TV, it is all attacking us. You got to have wider teeth. You got to have more hair. You got to be more fit. And it is playing to our fears, right? Buy this cream, drink this beer, you'll be cool. Tech is the same. People want you to read their blogs. They're going to say something very provocative. Rails is dead, Rails is back, Angular's dead, etc. Right? You're just spinning your cycles are like a hamster on a wheel. Focus on the fundamentals. Focus on the things that don't change. Third value here is you have to find a way to work in a sustainable fashion. Absolutely do not cram. And the number one thing to establish here is good study habits that you can carry for the rest of your life. Just because you're in a training program today doesn't mean you'll stop studying when you are a working professional. In fact, that's going to be even more important. So build good study habits, not only for, a learn to program training school that you're taking, but forever. And this third sub-bullet here, allowing your brain to digest and marinate. The way the brain learns is very unique. Cramming does not work. It doesn't work for long-term learning. I think we've all experienced that, right? So I'll mention an example given by somebody I really admire is Kathy Sierra. She is a programmer, educator, author, writes programming books, does training. So she always in her talks gives this example of a job called chicken sexer, which sounds crazy, but it is somebody who is supposed to separate the males from the females of baby chickens. So it's a chicken sexer. And I believe she said this was in Japan or something like that, but it was very difficult to train people to perform this role. So they had experts write down what they look for. And I guess the chicks are coming down like a conveyor belt or something, and you just have to do, it takes like half a second to make a decision for one of them. So it's very fast. And so they had these expert chick sexers write down the criteria they were looking for. And then they're trained beginners to do this, and they just couldn't. Right? No amount of description and training helped. But they stumbled upon one training method that seemed to work. And they don't really know how it works, but it works. And they just have the beginner performing the task randomly and having an expert saying yes or no, you did that right or you did that wrong, right? And so over time, your brain establishes subconsciously certain patterns. And so it's the idea of allowing your brain to marinate in the topic for a long period of time. And your brain is working on establishing a mental model. It's working on that. It's working on establishing patterns. These are the things that's going to carry you from a hack and slash beginner to a true professional. Having a strong mental model, that intuition, the patterns, and there's no quick way about it. It takes a very long time. The last thing here with regards to mastery is the need to eliminate expectations and milestones. Kind of related to timelines, but this goes back to the idea I was talking about earlier of mastery versus performance goals. There's a difference between the two. And again, this is called goal orientation theory, right? So measure how many hours you spend, not certain arbitrary milestones, right? Like I'm going to finish this course in a month. Why? What does finish mean? What if you click through all the boxes, but you're at 60% comprehension? Is that finish? That's not a good goal. That's a performance goal, right? A mastery goal would be, I'm going to spend 100 hours this month on this topic. That's a mastery goal. Okay? These are very hard. These 4 bullet points, easy to read, easy to type, very, very difficult to enact in your life. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here. What does mastery-based learning at launch school look like? So think about that knowledge tree that we talked about earlier and the need to go down that knowledge tree, right? That's what we all want. Learn A, learn B, learn AB, etc., right? We want to work our way down that knowledge tree. In a mastery-based learning environment, we also sometimes need to go up that tree. And that sounds counterintuitive. Isn't that going backwards? And so I'm purposely trying to not use the words forwards and backwards. That's a factory-based kind of jargon. In a mastery-based learning, it's very common, for example, to master A, pass the assessment, move to AB, do well in AB, take the assessment, and not pass. And in the assessment, the diagnosis could be, hey, it looks like your knowledge of A evaporated, right? It faded. It regressed. It happens. It regressed. So it's not that you go and work on another exercise at the AB level, right? I see this happening all the time too, is people work on an exercise at AB and our TA team would look at it and say, wow, it looks like the problem isn't lack of understanding of AB, it's a lack of understanding of B. So they'll point out the problem, student will go on to another AB exercise. Guess what happens again? The lack of understanding of B continues to trip them up. So the right thing to do at that point in time is to go and refresh, revisit, review B. Go up the tree. In a factory model, it's almost like shameful, right? Like going backwards is a shameful event. In the United States, at least, flunking is an extremely embarrassing thing. You don't want to flunk. That's really embarrassing. All your friends are in the same grade. They're all moving forward to the next grade, and you flunked, right? That's embarrassing. In a mastery-based environment, it's critical that you are able to go down and up that tree. Revisit and refresh on the previous nodes that you already went through, that you already mastered. So how we do this is through assessments, right? We have the structure, we have a sequence, we also have assessments. Assessments is where we spend most of our one-on-one time in our program. We have senior developers, experts giving you feedback, analyzing what your strengths, what your weaknesses are, and then providing a diagnosis. Code reviews, we do that as well. So you have to be okay with that. This is, again, why you need to take time off the table. Okay, I allocate 2 weeks for A and 2 weeks for AB. And you get to AB, and in the assessment, we say, hey, you got to spend a couple more days on A. Well, no, I'm sorry, I didn't allocate time for that. I'm behind schedule. My contract is up in December. It's like, what are we talking about? We're talking about comprehension, right? Not your contract. So the third bullet point here is about price. And it's very interesting because A lot of people ask, how'd you come up with the price? Some people even say, it's interesting, you're backfilling random philosophy to justify the monthly cost. Of course, you would want people to learn forever because you're a monthly service. And it's actually the opposite, right? We thought really hard about what the best mastery-based learning program would look like. And we set out to build that. And then we realized there's this inherent conflict between a mastery-based program that really requires an indefinite amount of time. We need people to be here as long as it takes and to learn without anxiety and to learn the thing in front of them without feeling rushed, without feeling pressured from some sort of arbitrary force that's not related to mastery. But yet, we still have to have a support structure in place. Potentially for a year, potentially for 2 years, right? How do we do that? If you price it too high, it's not sustainable, right? We can price the curriculum at $1,000 a month. And at $1,000, we're able to offer a lot more support, right? But that's not sustainable. At $1,000 a month, it is going to induce a lot of financial pressure, which again is going to compromise the integrity of a mastery-based learning environment, right? So this is how we came up with our price. It's low enough. Now, let me just back up and say, I understand it's not low for everybody. And that's okay, right? We do have a support structure in place that we have to pay. So, but we feel that for the most part, it is a sustainable price. It is something that doesn't induce a whole lot of anxiety, right? It's annoying, certainly, but it's not devastating. And hopefully it doesn't compromise the focus on comprehension. If it takes an extra month, it's okay. If it takes an extra 2 months, it's fine. It's annoying, but it's all right. It's worth it. And this fourth bullet point on focusing on things that don't change also arises out of this. Because if you are asking people to learn to mastery, and it could take a year or 2 years, people naturally wonder, are the things I'm learning even useful after a year or 2 years, right? I'm trying to catch this train here. It's good times, right? I'm trying to catch this train. Here at Launch School, we're not trying to catch a train. We're not trying to catch anything. There's no wave you're trying to catch. We're trying to focus and master things that don't change. In bad times, you'll make a little less money. In good times, you'll make more money. That's the idea, right? So things that don't change. Really important, critical piece of being able to focus on mastery. And you can see that everything we do is related to this, right? Everything we do is related to comprehension. And it's done with an eye towards sustainability. So you can do it for a long time because that's what it takes. Okay, very quickly here. One of the last slides, just a quick summary. Trade-offs, right? Pace, individual self-pace for a mastery model. No start and end dates, or no end date at least, right? There's no graduation. Indefinite duration. It's very confusing. And your progress is measured by your comprehension level. And again, at the end, supposedly, right, if we do this right, the knowledge is mastery level instead of, I'm not sure where you're at in a factory model. So I want to talk about perhaps the duration again. The duration, how it's infinite or indefinite. Not infinite, but indefinite. It's a source of a lot of anxiety from not only a timeline perspective, but there's a lot of social factors at work. And so you really have to navigate that. So the first thing you do if you tell somebody that you're taking a class is, oh, when do you graduate? Right? When are you done? If you're in a mastery-based learning environment and you keep learning and you're doing well, but sometimes friends, family will say, wow, you're still doing that? You might be slow, right? Something might be wrong with you. So you got to keep that in mind. You have to juggle all these forces or sources of anxiety. And this is why I think learning on the job is very difficult, because your employer has expectations for you. Your employer will say, hey, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to learn something. Can you imagine 2 weeks? We got this Ember Rails app. I'm going to give you 3 weeks to ramp up on it. Sound good? That's not good at all, right? Depending on your background, but usually that's not good at all. So employers are very impatient. Definitely a time component is there. Very, very strong time component. So I want to encourage everybody to I know it's not easy, but I want you to at least think about it. Be open to the idea, right? And then figure out how to juggle it, of removing timelines and dealing with all these different sources of pressure and allowing yourself an environment to learn anxiety-free. That's the key. Learn the thing in front of you really, really well, anxiety-free. How do you accomplish that? That's the key. I want to end with this thought. So we go back to the idea of all those various input shapes turning into stars. I think we all have experience with factory-based education. I think we've all seen that most people who go through that system are let down by it. If you think about your classmates from elementary school, middle school, high school, college, maybe you made it through. But most people probably didn't reach 100% mastery each step of the way, right? Vast majority didn't. With mastery-based learning, you can do it. It's within your control. You just have to allow your brain the time to digest each topic and have a habit of learning deeply as opposed to this idea of hopping on the conveyor belt and moving forward and encountering new topics, right? You have to eliminate that idea and get rid of all the sources of anxiety, whether it's from time, expectations, this is milestones or timelines, expectations, money and social pressures, right? Eliminate those sources of anxiety and then afford yourself the room to learn to mastery. Okay, I have a reading assignment for you. This book is called Mastery by George Leonard. It's on Amazon for $9 or $10. Definitely get this and read it. I think you could probably knock it out in about a day. We don't do admissions at launch school. We take everybody. But I might say this is the admissions ticket. So definitely do it. All right, next steps. Read the book by George Leonard. There's a couple books called Mastery. Don't get the other ones. Get this one. Start our prep courses if you haven't already. It's completely free. And join our community. It's completely free. We have a chat room. We have forums. And if you have any other thoughts or questions, follow up at hello@launchschool.com. Okay? I'm going to open up for questions. Any advice on study habits? Yes. I guess you should probably look at the other webinar. Full hour on that topic. What are some good ways to avoid the social pressures? I think that's tough because this is a hard concept to explain to people. And the only thing I can say is that not many people are good at any one thing. Very few people reach a mastery level in anything in their lives. So when you talk to those people, it's very difficult, right? I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you talk to somebody who is really good at something and you start to say this, they go, yes, exactly. And I have conversations with students, all day, every day. And the people who are already an expert at something, they always go, oh yeah, of course. That's exactly how it's done. I completely buy into what you're doing here at launch school because that's how I became an expert in, whatever it is. People who have not yet gone through that journey, it's a little bit more difficult. Maybe have them read this book. Right. So Constantine is making a point where saying be consistent. There are times when you want to stop and say that you are not good enough. Don't do that. Press on and make it a habit. That's very true. And I think that's the key to mastery-based education is that if you don't pass an assessment, it's not the final verdict, right? It means move up that tree, right? I'm trying to not say go back, right? Move up that tree. Reinforce on the previous nodes, right? Remember, ambiguity compounds exponentially, right? So instead of staying at the point of confusion where you're already confused, go up that tree. You need to study more. Exactly. Getting a high-paying job as a software developer, I believe, is well within the ability of the vast majority of people. Most people do not give themselves the time or the room to get there. They're always looking for shortcuts. fear of missing out. There's this 2-month, 3-month, 4-month thing, or there's this thing that is indefinite. So give yourself room. You'll get there. Everybody can do it. It's within your control. It takes time though. The one thing that this won't work is if you say, hey, I only have 5 hours a week and I'm looking to get a job by the end of the year. It's not that easy, I guess, but it's not that hard, but it takes time. That's the end of my presentation. I think there's a lot of people ask questions like, oh, will you build a portfolio? And again, these are performance goals meant to impress external people. Always focus on the internal improvement. Reach a mastery level. Doesn't matter if you got a portfolio or not. All right, guys, have a good day. Thanks for attending.